Okay, in this video I'm just going to take you through a range of tough questions that you may be asked as part of your SAC, your exam, just honing in on some of those skills we've been talking about using those words, private and social cost, clearly explaining the negative externality, linking things to relative prices, and really clearly articulating how governments can intervene within these markets. So a good example, explain why the consumption of alcopops is an example of a market failure and how the government can intervene to help internalise the negative externality. Then explain 2 reasons why the tax on alcohol pops may be ineffective in reducing the negative externality. So alcopops are pre-mixed vodka drinks. The consumption of alcohol pops leads to detrimental effects for third parties. It therefore is classified as a negative externality in consumption. Okay, make it that clear, as society will negatively be affected through violence and drink driving, which can lead to deaths. They're over-allocated in society as producers and consumers don't consider these third-party costs and hence are not a socially optimal level of production. The government can respond to this over-allocation by imposing taxes or legislation on the consumption of alcopops. An example could be imposing a tax on the good. So the tax aimed to internalise the social cost of the transaction, e.g. the binge drinking and the violence, and helps reallocate resources to more socially optimal production. So the excise tax will increase the production costs of producers, shifting the supply curve to the left. So really using this equilibrium analysis, this will create a shortage of alcopops leading to a higher price, and therefore demand will contract as consumers shift to alternative products due to the higher price. This will therefore lead to more resources being allocated to other goods and services. The government can also legislate through having age restrictions on the consumption of alcohol. This will decrease the demand for alcohol, and thus the lowered price caused by the price mechanism will deter producers. That's talking about if we use the age limits. Decreasing supply as producers shift their resources elsewhere. Unfortunately, though, alcopops have a relatively inelastic demand, so the increase in price caused by the tax is likely to have a less than proportionate impact on the quantity demanded. This could lead to a continuation of the negative externality. And secondly, alcopops are very easily substitutable. So even if we stop drinking alcopops, we may turn to other substances like illegal recreational drugs, beer, wine, or other alcoholic beverages. So the lower relative price of these goods compared to alcopops may just lead to more consumption in these areas. Explain why vaccinating your children is an example of a positive externality in consumption and how the government intervened to reduce the market failure. So really clear examples are important here about how we can use the price mechanism. So a positive externality is a benefit on a third party of a transaction. In a transaction, the producer and consumers are the first and second parties, not that necessary. They are likely to ignore the third-party benefits imposed on third parties. So the underallocation of vaccines for children is a form of market failure because there is a suboptimal level of production of vaccinations which doesn't maximise the needs and wants of society. Vaccination is an example of a positive externality in consumption because when the children are vaccinated, other parties or other children are less likely to become sick and diseases won't spread. This can also lead to other benefits like less hospital use, less medical emergencies, less money need to be paid for in tax to fund hospitals, and therefore a more productive workforce as potentially parents aren't missing time looking after their children. Make sure you really clearly articulate the positive externality. Also reduce the number of sick children means that parents are less likely to miss work, which can lead to cheaper products and better productivity. Reducing the spread of disease also makes people feel safer from illness and are less stressed about their children's health. The government can intervene in this market by providing free healthcare centres which provide vaccinations, subsidising vaccinations. This aims to lower production costs for firms and internalise the third-party benefits, which will therefore make them cheaper and more resources will flow. Or they can have advertising campaigns or implement policies like the no jab, no pay, which could both increase the demand for vaccinations, which means you don't get subsidies for childcare unless you vaccinate your children. Explain the private and social benefits associated with training and development and training and education, and research and development, and explain how governments can intervene to assure a more socially optimal allocation of resources. Okay, they're both examples of positive externalities which generate third-party benefits for society. The private benefits associated with training and education are that companies are more productive, which can lower their costs of production and increase their profits. The social benefits of training include lower crime rates, the potential for other companies to benefit from a more educated and skilled workforce, an increase in Australia's GDP, and potentially more tax. In regards to research and development, private firms benefit from finding new cures for diseases or better production techniques, which should boost their profitability. But there's also third-party benefits from For example, if we come up with a cure for cancer, that can help cancer sufferers and their families, as well as the government saving money on healthcare costs. If businesses businesses might have fewer sick days, which also increase productivity. With research and development into new technology, that can include reduced production costs and increased profitability for other firms as well. So in order to ensure a more optimal allocation of resources, the government can subsidise training and education, which will lower the cost of production and therefore make them more viable. They can give grants or tax concessions, which allow businesses to claim additional expenditure for tax, which should help to boost, which should also help to reduce firms' production costs. So this all helps to internalise the third-party benefits and lead to a more socially optimal allocation of resources. Finally, climate change can be seen as the worst market failure the world has ever seen. Explain why it's a market failure and how we can use the price mechanism to create a more efficient allocation of resources. So, define market failure. Explain that goods and services with negative externalities are over-allocated because we don't consider the third-party costs and we're self-interested. Climate change is a negative externality in both production and consumption because when we emit carbon, when we drive our cars or when we produce goods or service into the atmosphere. It's arguably taking place because of excessive carbon emissions, and that's leading to negative impacts like extreme weather events, airborne diseases, rising sea levels, which can hurt tourism, etc. The cost of current consumption and production are externalised onto future generations. That's why it's a negative externality. The government can intervene by taxing carbon emissions, which internalises the cost of the externalities and raises the price of emitting using carbon. That will lead to a contraction in demand for these activities. It should also lower the relative price of renewable energy and lead to increased investment in these areas. So this will lead to less carbon emissions and reduce the onset of climate change. So make it really clear the impact it has on relative prices and the reallocation of resources. They may also subsidise environmentally friendly productions, so for example wind energy instead of coal manufacturing, reducing firms' costs of production and encouraging profit-motivated producers to emit less carbon and reduce their negative externalities.